my name is Srikrishna Ayyangar. I am faculty at the Azim Premji University in Bangalore. And we are today celebrating the launch of a new book called India Transformation and Permanence. And it is in that sort of occasion we have invited Mr. Chakravarty, who is a contributor to the book. So welcome, sir. Just a brief background to Mr. Chakravarty. He's a former Indian Foreign Service officer and was the Secretary of Economic Relations in the Ministry of External Affairs. He was also the Indian ambassador to Thailand and is currently a visiting fellow at the Observer Research Foundation. As the High Commissioner to Bangladesh, he drafted the initial concept proposal for the land boundary agreement, which solved the un-demarcated border, Enclaves and Adverse possessions. I should also congratulate him individually. He's just released a book called Transformation, Emergence of Bangladesh and the Evolution of India-Bangladesh Ties, published by KW Publishers. The book, I think, would be very useful for students who want to understand the history of Bangladesh and primarily Sheikh Hasina's role in transforming bilateral ties with India. So welcome, sir.
Thank you.
I must say, many of us who grew up, in the 90s were very enamored about diplomats, and we thought it was we still continue to think it's a very glamorous life, and it's you get to visit many countries and so on. So I just wanted to know from you, what is a typical day like, if it were a typical day as an Indian Foreign Service officer? How does it, how does it pan out?
Well, that would depend where you are based. We have the headquarters in Delhi, the Ministry of External Affairs, or you are in what we call an embassy or a high commission, working there in a specific job. The specific job can also be in the ministry, but here in the ministry you would be handling, let's say, a group of countries. Whereas if you are in a country, then you will be handling affairs of that country alone. Let's say that a junior officer is posted to embassy X or high commission Y, and he said, okay, you will be the first secretary for commercial affairs. So then he will be dealing with trade, he will be dealing with investments, he will be interacting with the chambers of commerce, and he will be pushing India's economic interests in that country. Or if you are say first secretary or second secretary, whatever, political, then you will study the political situation, you will report on that, what's happening, you will then whether that country and India, how's the relationship to be taken forward, etc. So those are the variety of things that we do. And in Delhi, of course, you look at it from the headquarters point of view.
Sure.
Because then you are looking at 3, 4, 5 or countries together.
Sure.
In a region. And then you see what's happening in the region. Then you give instructions or you receive reports. That's how it works.
I see. Well, we have been fed on a diet of many Hollywood and Bollywood movies where diplomats play really sensational roles, right? Where they're called by a politician and they're either dressed down, or you have you're visiting foreign places and you're doing some exciting stuff. Is that also part of the overall sort of job as a diplomat?
Well, much of it is mundane stuff. But I think, yes, in a few instances it can happen. It happened to me, for example, which I would like to mention here, that I was posted as the Consul General of India at Karachi.
Oh.
And which was a difficult place in many ways to function, but it was also an important place for us because we had a lot of consular work there, mainly issuing visas and trade, because Karachi is the sort of a commercial capital of Pakistan. So, but what happened one day was that I got a call from my ambassador in Islamabad saying, look, they have decided to close down your mission in Karachi. So I said, really, sir? So he said, yes, and you have 10 days to wind up. So that was something that, which hits you, suddenly, and then you switch from the mundane to the emergency mode. And so that kind of thing also happens in diplomacy. And then there are other issues like, you can get into a certain, like in Bangladesh, it happened to me that I said something on which the opposition party didn't like it very much. So they said, expel the Indian High Commissioner. So, these kind of things will happen. But this is all part of the game.
I see. So being a diplomat is like, in some sense, how do I put it? It's serious business, because this is, you need to really know how to be a diplomat in that sense. It's not like you are just an agent of the interests of a particular state, but you're also someone who has to know how to handle people, how to manage these sort of contentious issues, and also in some sense be responsible as a servant or as a civil servant of the country. So it doesn't sound as simple as or as glamorous as you would think about.
Well, this glamour part is, of course, there because of certain movies or certain Hollywood, Bollywood kind of characters. But I can assure you, it's not very glamorous. There's a lot of hard work that goes in.
Sure.
Let's take, for example, the problems of Indians living abroad. That's part of our ambit, and we have to deal with them, help them, and overcome some of those difficulties. You have read stories about how some Indians are put in jail or something.
Correct.
Then we have to pursue that, get them back because they are our citizens.
Correct.
And we owe them this service.
Correct.
Then there's passports and all kinds of things are.
Yeah.
So this is much of it, as I said, is routine and mundane. Yes, you do get to meet celebrities sometimes. You do get to meet the high and mighty of that country. So there are two aspects. One is the specific to that country. The other is a more general training, like how to deal with the situation, how to put across your case. Because diplomacy is, as I said, is about persuasion. So you have to, and there's this joke about diplomats which says that a diplomat can persuade you to go to hell and you will enjoy the journey.
I see. Very nicely put, sir. I just wanted to tell the viewers that today's book, India's Transformation and Permanence, Mr. Chakravarty has written an excellent article that gives us an overview of India's relations with its neighbours, covering many countries from Pakistan to Maldives, if you go in a sort of clockwise direction. So I just wanted to ask you a little bit about that particular article, sir. The way I understood it, India has, and I'm just trying to sort of categorize our relations with our neighbours. That looks like, from what I understand from your book, we have very friendly relations with countries like Bangladesh and Bhutan and Nepal, and we have, for historical reasons beyond our control, difficult relations, let's say, with Pakistan. And then in between we have, relations, with very nice relations and very difficult, we have relations in between, which I would think where Sri Lanka and Maldives would sort of fit in. So, I was just curious to know how do you think this sort of framing makes sense, and if so, what do you think accounts for this kind of a relationship? I mean, you've also served now I just learned you served in Karachi and you served in Bangladesh. What do you think makes the difference? I mean, why do we have, could you, apart from the historical issues, do you think there's something that accounts for this kind of difference amongst how we deal with our neighbors?
Well, geographically, as you know, India is the largest country. So there is a huge asymmetry in the capabilities, in the size, in the technological, and in almost every aspect. There is a huge difference between the smaller neighbors and India. That creates a certain amount of, I won't say fear, but anxiety among the smaller neighbors. That what is India going to do? Because they are also very much dependent on us, as we are on them for certain things. Now, neighbors will always be, Chanakya said that a neighbor will never be your friend. The country beyond your neighbor will be your friend. So anyway, that's a hypothesis he made in those days.
Correct.
And it is true to some extent still. But I look at neighbors as, the first circle of our civilizational contact points. Of course, the Indic civilization, which is now broken into different parts after partition and all that. But there was a time when, let's say, even Afghanistan was Buddhist.
Correct.
So it all went from here in a cultural sense. So there is this Indic civilization, and there is the idea of India, and then of course is today's India, which is kind of defined by a certain boundary, which was redone in 1947.
Correct.
Now, there's history involved in terms of how they look at us, how we look at them. There's also the fact that they expect a lot more from us than we can deliver sometimes, because they think India is big, India is more capable, India has the resources, so India should help us more, etc. So this is the kind of ambience and the psychological mindset that operates
I see.
with neighbors. So this is where you have to navigate and do the best you can.
Sure. Talking about neighbors, I was struck by the relationship that you talked about with Bangladesh, and I was also sort of very fascinated with a small country called Bhutan. I'm just curious, in your experience as a diplomat, are there some things that we can learn from these countries? I know the relationship is asymmetric, and therefore we might feel that we don't have much to learn from these very small countries. But Bhutan being we've heard it's a very beautiful and it's a very peaceful country. What do you think a country such as ours can learn from these small countries like Bhutan and Bangladesh?
One thing I think we can learn a lot. I think from their practices, their how they do things, etc. But it's sometimes very difficult because we are far too diverse. Now, Bhutan is not diverse. It has a fairly homogeneous population except for the Nepalese who have settled there. So is Bangladesh to a large extent, except for the tribal and other groups that are there. So it's 90% Muslim, for example, Bangladesh, only 10% of other communities that are there. So in a sense, they are ethnically and otherwise more homogeneous in many ways. So is Bhutan. But we are not. We are multicultural, multi-religious, and there are large communities here which are not small. So our outlook is different. The way we do things is different. We are too large. We are a federal kind of a system also. They are not.
Okay.
So there are a lot of political and other structural, difference. But yes, we can learn from them. For example, we can learn, for example, from Bhutan, how to maintain the atmosphere and the climate, because they're very strict on some of these things.
I see.
And they don't allow a lot of things just to ensure that their climate that is not disturbed. And the pollution, for example, and so many things. We can learn from them as to how they do it. Bangladesh also, we can learn as to how they have managed a very successful business like the ready-made garments business, which is Bangladesh is one of the leading producers of garments. You go to any mall, you may pick up something made in Bangladesh. So they have done very well on that. We can learn. But there are economics of it also matters, because Bangladesh is a country where it has low wages. And this is very, what shall we say, labor-intensive work.
Correct.
So that's how the business goes there. Business goes where it is cheapest to produce.
Sure.
Like it once came to India, textiles and garments. Now it has moved there. So that is going to happen. So these are the things we can learn from them. We can learn other things from them, culturally and economically, and how to sort of, how they manage their things is something we can learn and pick up whatever we think is good for us as well.
Sure. So another more academic question, just which is because you have that experience, and I wanted to ask you. Many students who would study South Asia will notice that India has been one of the most stable democracies, whereas all the other countries around, or not all, but at least most of them, if not all of them, have been relatively unstable, right? We've had frequent turnover of political executives and so on. What is your sense as to why we find India being more stable and the neighbouring countries generally being, vulnerable to all kinds of instabilities? What is your sense of that?
Well, let me begin by what is today Bangladesh and Pakistan. They were one country at one time. You know the history, how the army came in, etc. And the army has been ruling Pakistan for the last at least 50 years of its existence directly, and from behind the scenes even now. Now, that ethos was actually transferred to the Bangladeshi military as well. So you had two military dictators there who were all trained in the Pakistani establishment. So their mindset was similar as to, as we are the army, we can control things, etc. Now, but we didn't. Our army has never even thought about it. Now, that's because our political evolution that took place after independence was quite different. And the army realized that India is too big a country to just take over and rule also.
Correct.
But the smaller countries, it's a different matter. So that's one big difference. That's why we remain stable, but they had periods of instability. That, I would say, is one of the reasons. But instability can also come from various things. Take Sri Lanka, for example. The Tamil issue created a lot of instability, violence, war, and finally it was solved, etc. But then suddenly we saw Sri Lanka, which is supposed to be doing very well, collapse during the COVID regime, COVID infestation that we were hit, because their economy went down.
Correct.
Because it was dependent on a lot on tourism. So that kind of dependency India does not have on one thing or the other. Sure. And that's why we remain stable. That we are not dependent on tourism, that if tourism stops tomorrow, India's economy will go down. That does not happen.
Sure.
We are too diverse. Our economy has a lot of space in different sectors. So that's some of the basic differences.
I just want to turn the conversation a little bit towards our students and young people. Many students now who are studying liberal arts are always interested in careers in international politics and international relations. When we were studying, it didn't seem that easy to accept through the foreign services. Do you find that there is now a greater diversity of avenues by which students who are interested in international politics or international relations would find suitable career paths? Has that field opened up in some sense, or is it still very protected or some controlled or whatever, governed by just the diplomatic service? Do you see greater scope?
No, I think clearly when we were thinking of a career, in the 70s, when we finished our masters, let's say I finished in 75, and then the choices were limited. You didn't have so many choices. The economy hadn't opened up. You had limited choices and you had to choose what you wanted to do. Today, I think the students have a far bigger the field of choices. But yes, diplomacy, the civil services still remain a very attractive proposition for many students. And if you say whether it was easier for me to get in and whether I would get in today, I really can't compare.
Correct.
Because things are so different. The examination system has also changed. I would say that yes, I would definitely say that competition has gone up.
And have the kinds of roles also gone up, in the sense that you could have, can young students in their 20s and 30s become international analysts or that kind of?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So you see that this space
absolutely. Take this university, for example.
Sure.
I mean, these are all new universities that we never had. We had the traditional, universities. That's where we went and studied and grew up. Today, the foreign service itself, which used to be a small elite service, has expanded. And when we joined the foreign service, we were not more than 15, 20 in 1 year. But today it's gone up to about 40.
Oh.
So there are a lot of people, that scope has opened up. So if you want to join the foreign service, of course the pathway to it is through the UPSC exam and things like that. So you have to study that, master that. And it's a competitive exam. And, if I do better than you or you do better than me by 1 mark, so you can get in, but I can't.
Yeah, it makes all the difference.
It makes all the difference.
Yeah, sure.
So that's how it works. And but I would still say that for our younger generation of students, that it remains an attractive choice. After all, you contribute to the building of the country in many ways and managing the country's policies.
Sure.
So which surely has to be an attractive thing that one has to aspire to.
Sure. I have just 2 more questions. One question is, so tell us which was the most challenging time that you've ever had as a diplomat, and then I'd be curious to know what was the most challenging time. Why don't you tell us that first, and then I'll ask the other question later.
Well, one challenge I've already mentioned was Karachi.
Yes.
Where you were thrown out of the place because in diplomatic language, it's called declared persona non grata. That, this is a French thing. A lot of diplomats we borrow from the French because they were original sort of writers or a lot of diplomatic
I see.
things. But then challenges are there. When I landed up in Bangladesh, for example, in 2007, there was this sudden change of the government. You can call it a semi-coup. It was a military-backed caretaker government which came, where a caretaker system in Bangladesh and in Pakistan is usually for 3 months to conduct the elections. Now, what happened then was that things were pretty bad in terms of the country's political infighting and all kinds of things. So that caretaker government which came was a technocratic government basically, and they decided to stay for 2 years. We didn't know how long they would stay then. So what to do? How do you deal with this kind of a government? Was a big challenge. And then, of course, policies were developed in the sense that we decided that, look, in a neighboring country, regardless of the nature of the government, we have to deal with them. So, for example, so we decided that whoever they are, whether they are legal or not legal, whether it is under their constitution or they have outlived that portion of the constitution, we decided that we'll go ahead and deal with them. And we did a lot of things with them in the sense of stabilize the situation, then do things in connectivity. The first train that ran from Dhaka to Kolkata was during that period. And I was there on that train to take that journey. So that was a memorable location.
Very nice. So the last question I wanted to ask was a little bit more on the popular fiction side. So you've been a diplomat, sir, and we only get to see spies and stuff and like James Bond kind of characters in movies. So have you ever seen a spy? How does a spy look like, or what do they really do? Just sort of curious, because we'll never see spies in my lifetime. I don't think I'll ever encounter a spy. But you've been a diplomat, so I'm just curious, what do these people look like?
Well, I have met spies, of course, and they look like you and me.
I see.
So they are like anybody else, and the best spy, as we know, is somebody who just melts into the crowd.
So no James Bond.
No, James Bond is fiction. And there's no James Bond here. No spy agency would like a James Bond. That I can tell you. And I have dealt intimately with our own intelligence agencies and all that. So, and we always say that a good intelligence person is somebody you can never spot, because that's his cover. So we also say, no, you are undercover, for example. So that's how it is, and so don't think a spy looks anything. Forget James Bond. James Bond is completely fictionalized, and it's a movie, it's a Bollywood, Hollywood kind of character.
Sure. Okay, so Mr. Chakravarty, we had another question, and so which is I think related not so much to the spies question, but very tense foreign relations, which is we've heard this word called démarche, right? So is it like being called to the principal's office and being given a sort of what really happens?
Well, it sounds like that, but it's not that. That as an ambassador, I've been summoned and we also use the word summoned, which shows that you better be here, that kind of thing. But basically, these are diplomatic language that says that it could have said it has been called to the Foreign Office for a meeting. But summoned has a connotation that there is something happening or there's something negative happening. It has a little bit of that sense. So you go there and they tell you, okay, look, this is what has happened. Let me tell you about one of my personal kind of things, which is always good to explain. I was summoned, for example, into the Foreign Office in Dhaka and said that your BSF has just killed 5 Bangladeshis on the border, and we protest, and we would like you to know that this is a very this is against our friendly bilateral relations. That's the kind of thing they would say. But basically they are protesting against a certain action which our border forces took because somebody was doing something, crossing the border or doing smuggling or something like that. So that's a démarche.
I see. Another question which also was in your chapter, and I just want to give it a little bit of context. So Mr. Fareed Zakaria, or Dr. Fareed Zakaria wrote this book many years ago called The Post-American World, right? Where we find that probably the 21st century is the century of the Asian countries, India and China. And I think I remember in your article, China plays a much larger role than is clearly visible to us who live in India. Do you see the century as a rivalry between India and China, as a rivalry not so much in terms of resources and so on, but also a rivalry in terms of ideas?
Well, I think the main, in our perspective, let's say 100 years, 200 years, I'm not going further back because world was different then. The post-World War order, as we call it, the international order, was basically fashioned by the victors of the war. So the Bretton Woods agreements, etc., and all that. So that is the international order we have seen mostly, which of course went into the bipolar world, because the bipolar world was basically the clash of ideas,
Yes.
communism versus. So, and the communism, the demise of communism in Soviet Union, basically solved that question that the liberal international order, the democracies and things, has come to prevail. But then, when China's economic started, China adopted a model of market capitalism, etc.
Correct.
But authoritarian communist control over the political system. So they have developed a different model altogether. And today, obviously, because of the rising nature of the economies of China, India, and their power in the power equation that prevails, so you can see comparatively less a gap between the US and Europe and China and India. So what happens when we believe in balance of power, for example? So a new rebalancing has to take place in the international order to keep it stable. Otherwise, we can get into conflict. Because when new powers arise, they usually challenge the older powers who are controlling things or whatever, and it can lead to conflict. But today, conflict is obviously the last option, because conflict today means nuclear war, which is the destruction of almost everybody or all that we know on this planet. So hence, the management of international politics today is quite different from, let's say, in the non-nuclear age. Because today, wars, you can have smaller conflicts, or you can have a little bit of proxy wars here and there. But the big powers will not get into a conflict which can escalate to the nuclear level. So that is the situation we are in today. There is a rebalancing of sorts going on, but this is still to play out.
So the rebalancing between, let's say, the West, US and the European Union countries on the one hand, and India and China on the other, is that how you see this sort of, because then it becomes a multipolar world more than a bipolar
Well,
world?
India has always been batting for a multipolar world, because we think that that is the more stable arrangement. But China does not think so. China thinks that it should be the pole, at least in Asia, and in the world, if not a pole, but at least, the second pole after America. China still has a long way to go to catch up with America in almost every sector. But China is moving fast. So we do not know. And China prefers to draw its own, vision of the world from what we call the Middle Kingdom mentality.
Correct. Yeah.
So which you're all aware of. So which is like, I am here, everybody else should be tributaries, that kind of thing. So this is part of their mindset and mentality. And since now they have the power, both economic and military, so they want to push that envelope to assume that vision or to reach that objective.
So on that note, sir, thank you very much, and welcome again to the university.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.